Hello, everyone, and welcome to Film Etc., the only movie review podcast you need in life. My name is Mike Webb. I'll be your host, and this is going to be a very special episode today because this is probably perhaps one of the most talked about movies in the past few months, probably years, I would say. It is Olivia Wilde's follow-up to her critically acclaimed film Booksmart called Don't Worry Darling, starring Florence Pugh and Harry Styles. I can't wait to tell you all about it, between like the juicy details and all the behind the scenes, what have you, and everything, and then my thoughts on the movie itself. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, before we get into this review, I must cap you off with a warning. If you guys are new to the show, or if this is your first time, or if you need a little bit of refresher, I am diagnosed with autism, so you may hear my wording get jumbled up a bit. So I hope you all forgive me, and I hope you all enjoy. Don't Worry Darling is the sophomore directorial effort from actress turned filmmaker Olivia Wilde, who has appeared in movies like Tron Legacy, Cowboys and Aliens, In Time, Rush, and Richard Jewell, to name a few. Her debut film as a director, the coming-of-age comedy Booksmart from 2019, was met with universal acclaim from critics, with some calling it one of their top 10 picks that year. The film even earned many accolades, including main star Beanie Feldstein a Golden Globe nomination for actress in a motion picture, comedy, or musical. Wilde has re-teamed with her Booksmart co-writer Katie Silberman on the film, where it stars Florence Pugh as Alice, a 1950s housewife living with her husband Jack, played by Harry Styles, in a utopian experimental community. But soon she begins to worry that the company her husband works for could be hiding some disturbing secrets. Wilde also co-stars in the film, as well as Gemma Chan, KiKi Layne, Nick Kroll, Sydney Chandler, and Chris Pine. Now, I'm going to do something a little bit different for this review. This movie has been under a lot of scrutiny in terms of being a troubled production, media uproar, potential controversy, and a PR nightmare. So I'm going to talk about all that first, but if you guys just want to hear my thoughts on the movie in general, I'm going to leave a time code in the description. I know some people who are probably going to listen to this and be like, I don't want to hear about it, or like, I already know about it. Why do I need to go through all this again? I just can't skim over that stuff and just completely ignore it to you all. And I just can't talk about it without all that in general. So I apologize if you don't want to hear any of this. I understand. But for those of you who haven't heard, here's how it all went down. So this movie was quickly announced after the success of Booksmart, and there was a big multi-studio bidding war. New Line Cinema won the auction, and Wilde stated that it was the only studio that would give the film a guaranteed theatrical release. And Warner Brothers, they've been having a bad year in terms of a business, I would say. But yeah, I would go on for like a 20-minute non sequitur. Is that the right phrase for it? About Warner Brothers Discovery and their big issue they've been having recently. But anyway, during pre-production, there was a conflict where Wilde fired Shia LaBeouf due to insubordinate behavior, and LaBeouf was originally going to play the role of Jack, who was then later replaced by Harry Styles, and during filming, Styles developed a relationship with Wilde. In the weeks leading up to the film's release, LaBeouf claimed that he quit the movie, and Wilde was trying desperate efforts to keep him on board. There's also speculation that Wilde also clashed with Florence Pugh on set. There isn't enough details at the moment, but because of that, Florence Pugh decided not to promote the film whatsoever and was fully committed to her role in Dune Part 2, where it was filming in Budapest. She did end up going to the film's premiere at the Venice Film Festival, but she did not attend the press conference. What's worse, she did not once look at Olivia Wilde and left 3 minutes after the film ended when the film premiered. And then there's this whole malarkey about whether or not Harry Styles spat on Chris Pine. That's just people spreading misinformation just to grab attention to all the news outlets and put the film under more troubled water. Someone inside the theater took video of it, and it looked like everyone was clapping and applauding for Harry Styles, who was sitting next to Chris Pine. But when Harry's about to take his seat, Pine, who's already sitting down, from the looks of it, it looked like Harry pursed his lips and Pine immediately stopped clapping and looked down. It turns out Chris Pine was looking at his sunglasses that were on his seat and picked them up. Pine's representative even denies that accusation. And poor Chris Pine having to go through all of that during Venice, during during the promotion for this movie, it looked like he was zoning out into space and didn't know what was going on. He's been the subject of a lot of memes that were put out online. This film has also been the case of a PR nightmare. For those of you who don't know what PR means, it stands for public relations. We know that Florence Pugh decided not to promote the film, but also Chris Pine decided not to do an interview with Jimmy Kimmel, and Olivia Wilde didn't want to do a New York Times article. And for the film's New York premiere, all the cast were there except for Florence Pugh and Chris Pine. There's a podcast that I listen to, and I want to give them a shout out. The Town with Matthew Bellany from The Ringer and Puck News. He's basically a business insider in the entertainment industry. It's a great listen. The podcast puts out 3 episodes a week, each about a half hour long. It helps me with how the business in Hollywood can either be fascinating or manipulative. But they recently put out an episode surrounding this film's controversy, and it's a good listen if you want to check it out. Oh, and one more thing I failed to mention is that Olivia Wilde used to be married to Jason Sudeikis, and they have 2 children. But during the production of this film, they ended their relationship. And while the film was being showcased at CinemaCon is like a Comic Con for like theater exhibitors, and all the theater owners get to go, where all the big studios showcase their movies and what they're going to be for the year. And Olivia Wilde was promoting Don't Worry Darling over there, while showing all the theater owners what the movie was about and everything. And while she was on stage, she was publicly served papers from Sudeikis for the custody of their children. I mean, talk about a very awkward situation here. I mean, all this outrage surrounding this film is about to reach a boiling point, and it makes me think twice about how Hollywood and the media in general can be extremely dangerous. But who knows how well it's going to do at the box office. So all that aside, the people behind the making of this movie are going to come out and talk about how troubling the production was in the years to come. I don't know who will. I mean, what I should say is that the impact of this film has like well, it'll just like cement his legacy as like a movie with like a troubled history, I would say. Anyway, guys, now that that's been settled, let's get to my review of Don't Worry Darling right after this transition. All right, so for those of you who decided to skip all the frenzy and wanted me to talk about all the thoughts on Don't Worry Darling, welcome. And it's somewhat disappointing. And unfortunately, Olivia Wilde has hit the dreaded sophomore slump. I went to the IMAX live event the Monday night of the week it was coming out, and there were a lot of diehard Harry Styles fans in the audience. And I'm not just the one talking about this, but before the film began, there was like a montage of images from the movie, and there was a live stream Q&A moderated by Dave Karger from Turner Classic Movies. Whenever Olivia Wilde's name was like called or just like appeared on screen, all the Harry Styles fans would like boo at her. And then when Harry came out, all the fans screamed in excitement and all that stuff. And I think seeing this with that type of audience at least gives you an experience. Like throughout the movie, there's some unintentional laughs that the fans made, mostly around Harry's character, as well as some audible gasps whenever someone said something shocking. And by the last 10 minutes, they were all cheering and having fun. So at least that part alone was at least some type of benefit, I would say. But the movie itself, I was vaguely disappointed. But let's get to my thoughts on the movie itself. I mentioned it's a sophomore slump, but it's at least visually stunning. There's amazing craftsmanship on display. The cinematography by Matthew Libatique, who's usually Darren Aronofsky's DP, is exquisite. The lavish production design and the costumes by Ariane Phillips are incredible. I'll have to admit, I have a massive crush on Florence Pugh, and my girl Flo can do no wrong. I've only seen I've only seen bits and pieces of Midsummer, so the only thing I can comment on her performance is that she's really good. But some people say that her role in that film is her best work. I first heard of Florence Pugh from a little movie she was in from 2017 called Lady Macbeth. Since then, she has gotten bigger roles. She had a small role in the Liam Neeson thriller The Commuter, which I don't even remember, honestly, nowadays. She was in the Netflix film Outlaw King with her Don't Worry Darling co-star Chris Pine. More on him in a sec. But then in 2019, she had a very big year, not only with Midsummer, but also the sports biopic Fighting with My Family, where she played real life WWE Diva star Paige, and co starring in Greta Gerwig's adaptation of Louisa May Alcott's Little Women, which earned her an Oscar nomination for Best Performance by an Actress in a Supporting Role. I thought she even stole the show as Yelena Belova in Black Widow, which I actually reviewed for this podcast back when I reviewed multiple movies in each episode. I enjoyed that movie at the time, but I had second thoughts since. She's still good though. She even appeared in the Hawkeye miniseries and also stole the show as well. So her character has like a very committed role in the MCU. But her character of Alice in this movie is perhaps not a surprise at all. The best thing about this movie. Despite all that elegance with the hair and makeup and the wonderful costumes that she wears, her acting is terrific. Although, in theory, she's basically copycatting her role in Midsummer, where the world around her isn't right, everyone's gaslighting her, and then it just all falls apart. I mentioned Chris Pine a brief moment ago. He also gives a solid performance as well, despite his character being very one dimensional. His character plays out like this sinister cult leader who's in charge of everything, who wants to make this utopian community well being and help create chaos and control and what have you. There's a really good scene that plays out in the second act at a dinner table, and the way both Florence Pugh and Chris Pine acted out is tense and also very elaborate. The sound design is very ominous as well, just around the surroundings that you see what Florence Pugh is going through. The cars are nice. I mentioned the production design and the house and everything, the dinner sets, and yeah, just basically the whole, just on a craftsmanship level, it's pretty good. And Florence Pugh and Chris Pine do give at least good performances. I enjoyed some of those aspects, but where it falters is the story and some of the supporting acting overall. The story is very ambitious, but also very convoluted and extremely perplexing. If you're looking for this movie to bring something new to the table, you're not going to find it here. It's set around this little utopian community called Victory in what looks like the California desert. The husbands are part of this thing where they go to this company and there's this project called the Victory Project. They leave to go to work while all the women act out like normal housewives. At first, you're intrigued by the world building of it all because it's like, oh, they're just like reliving like what the 1950s were like and all that stuff. But then you have a bunch of questions like, what is the Victory Project? What do the husbands do there for a living? Why do they drive off in the middle of the desert to go work at that building? What's inside that building? Why isn't anyone else concerned about this? Why don't the husbands talk about their work in front of their wives? All these questions that you have are mostly going to be left either unanswered or very disappointed by the end of the film. And some people think from watching the trailers alone, they would categorize it as a horror movie. It's not really horror, it's more of a psychological mystery thriller. There is some good tension in this movie that builds mostly in the first act, but after a while, it just slowly deflates to a point where it just becomes completely useless. And throughout the movie, I just felt this sense of familiarity, and I wasn't too compelled of how it was playing out. Although there are clues that are like hinted at the film's dialogue, and you're thinking to yourself, this could go somewhere. At first, it feels like you're watching an episode of Twilight Zone or Black Mirror stretched out to feature length. But when the big reveal comes at in the beginning of third act, it becomes almost like I would call like an M. Night Shyamalan effect or something like that. And all of a sudden, everything completely shifts in tone and becomes very unoriginal. All those ideas you think you had in your head earlier go completely out the window. It then becomes a mishmash of other movies that do it better. And I even saw a little blurb on some of the movies that Olivia Wilde cited as influences, but I'm not going to tell you here. So I mentioned the story overall is like completely convoluted and perplexing. It's completely different from how Booksmart was like raunchy, but also at the same time honest and smart and also fun as well. And I was hoping it would be like something that Olivia Wilde can like help continue on as like her legacy as a filmmaker. And it could still be because of the troubling production and the frenzy revolving around it. I was hoping in the third act there'd be like a potential moment, but all of a sudden it goes in like a complete 180 and it just felt like such a betrayal. it just becomes silly by the film's end. And when it reaches its climax, it just immediately ends on a cliffhanger. And we're just left to decide for ourselves what happened, which just ticks me off. It's also a little too long. I think the second act of the film really drags the movie on. It's a 2 hour movie, but I would trim out probably at least 15-20 minutes. I ended up leaving Don't Worry Darling a little bit outraged. I could go on and do a whole spoiler section of this review, but that's not who I am. Sometimes if I spoil a movie, there's something meaningful in context surrounding the spoilers, but that's not the case here, unfortunately. So, yeah, this is basically the Florence Pugh show with a small dose of Chris Pine. This movie would have worked better if Pine was given a bigger role and was more central to the story, but the version we got entirely revolves around Pugh and Harry Styles. And it's just very complicated. And a lot of people were hoping that this would be Warner Brothers' big awards player, but now it's looking like it's not going to happen. And Elvis, which came out back in the summer, is now going to be the studio's main priority for awards season. And unfortunately, Don't Worry Darling is going to end up in like a list of like failed Oscar bait movies. I will say this to end on this review. This movie is at least something to behold. It's a mess both on and off screen. Going into it, I didn't want to focus on all the drama all that much. I think Olivia Wilde, Florence Pugh, and Harry Styles are getting too much hate from all this bad blood, especially now calling the Harry and Chris thing, quote, Spitgate. All that frenzy overall is going to be irrelevant years down the road. Even from all that, this movie is actually making money. It debuted at #1 at the box office with 19 million on a $35 million budget, and audiences are enjoying it. Say what you will about the B- cinema score. I don't typically trust that side at all, but there could be a possible cult following around this movie. It's not like garbage, I want to say. I'm not saying you should avoid this movie at all costs. I was just underwhelmed by it all. If you are interested and want to form your own opinion around it, it's now playing in theaters everywhere. I gave the first 2/3 of this movie a 5, and then the last third of the movie was a 3. And for that, I average it out to a 4.3 out of 10. So, guys, those are my thoughts on Don't Worry, Darling. And so now let's end this episode and call it a day. That's going to do it for this episode. Have you guys seen Don't Worry Darling? What are your thoughts? Let me know. I'm on social media on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at Real Mike Webb. You can also follow the show on Instagram at FilmETCcast. Make sure you subscribe and follow the show on all the many places that we stream, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, you name it. Leave a good rating, leave a 5-star review on our Apple Podcast page. That'll help get the show up to the top of the charts. Tell your friends, spread the word of mouth, share the show if you must. I'll be back pretty soon with more reviews, but until then, thanks for listening, and until next time, I will see you all at the cinema.